This video is brought to you by the Opera web browser.
During the 1950s, to protect themselves from Soviet nuclear bombers, the US designed one of the most advanced aircraft ever made. It could reach speeds of over Mach 3, had cutting-edge technology for the time, and it could absolutely decimate the enemy. Well, at least on paper. Despite being so incredible, the US government actually passed on pressing it into service, and these hyper fighter jets never came to be. Let's explore the story behind one of the coolest interceptor aircraft we've ever covered on the channel, the XF-108 Rapier. When we talk about the post-World War II period, mostly we think of the cars, the style, and the wonderful aesthetic of the 1950s. Milkshake shops on every corner. But there is one thing that marked this period of American history: the fear of total nuclear annihilation. At the end of World War II, people got to see humanity's most devastating weapon yet, the nuclear bomb. This aircraft was designed with a mission that it must not fail, stopping Soviet nuclear bombers from reaching the innocent civilians on the American mainland. The engineers knew that this aircraft needed to be the very best, and there is a lesson here to actually use the very best when it comes to technology. Exactly why I switched to the Opera One R2 web browser and its amazing built-in AI feature, Aria. The Aria AI is unlike any others. I love that it has a built-in AI image generator to bring my videos to life, AI image recognition to help identify obscure aircraft, and it is actually connected to the internet so it can provide real-time information, as well as be trained to write in my own personal style to help figure out writer's block. But that's not even the tip of the iceberg, because it's not just the AI feature. Because I use the internet so much for work, the new Opera web browser has been super helpful in getting work done faster and better. For example, I love my tabs, and Tab Islands makes it easy to keep everything organized by topic. And speaking of tabs, since I often have lots of sites open, Tab Traces is a smart way to help me navigate them. Recently visited tabs are underlined. A darker underscore means more recently opened, allowing you to keep track of where you are. Then also built into the browser, I have a split screen feature, perfect to work on two sites at the same time, and I can choose the theme of my browser, including the animated backgrounds, UI colors, sounds, and more. Themes like Aurora or Midsummer are pretty fantastic. There is also a video player and music player built into the sidebar to listen to tunes while making the next Fan Explained video. Honestly, this is a great reimagining of what a web browser could be. So if you're ready to join me in the future, go to the link down below to get the Opera One R2 web browser and its amazing AI Aria today. The Soviets developed nukes of their own, a lot of them in fact, and now the only thing keeping the world safe was the fear of mutually assured destruction. This concept, called nuclear deterrence, basically says if you drop nukes on us, we'll respond the exact same way. It's a lose-lose situation. Except for Fallout fans, I guess. However, for nuclear deterrence to work effectively, methods and technology to deliver nukes have to be on par. If one side had inferior or ineffective means of bombing their enemy with these weapons, they could potentially lose a nuclear war even before it began. And their opponent, whilst taking some damage from nukes, would recover and come out as the victor. And history, of course, is written by the victors. For this reason, both the US and the Soviets were locked in a technological race that went beyond just the nukes themselves. And it's exactly one of these moments that happened in 1954 when Americans received a scare like no other. Just after Valentine's Day on February 15th, Aviation Week published an article where they described a bomber like no other, the Messerschmitt M4 Bison. Many rumors about this aircraft started to circulate in the media, and they eventually reached Congress. It was believed that this plane could take off from the USSR, reach the United States continental mainland itself, and bomb it while flying at a supersonic speed. In 1955, reports from the Soviet Aviation Day airshow indicated that the Soviets already had 28 planes, and many more on the way. If they could keep up the production in only 5 years, they would have around 800 aircraft. So something needed to be done to overcome this so-called bomber gap. The US wasn't dumb, and President Eisenhower urged caution. The logical thing would be to simply increase the number of their own bombers. So they started quickly ironing out the B-47s and increasing orders for the newly introduced B-52 Stratofortress. However, there were fears that this still wouldn't be enough, and there should be a weapon created specifically to eliminate the M4s before they could ever reach the US coast. They needed an interceptor, and thus the US Air Force started a program called the LRIX, or Long Range Interceptor Experimental. Whilst there were many designs thrown into the ring, only 3 were actually seriously considered by the US Air Force: Lockheed, Northrop, and North American. Lockheed would propose the model CL-288-1, which would later evolve into the CL-320. Northrop would create the N-176. It would start off as a Delta Scorpion, an F-89D with a Delta wing, and then evolve into its own design, eventually getting 8 engines. Wow. But it would be the last on this list that would come out on top. The US Air Force decided that the NA-236 from North American was the most promising, and they won the contract. At the end of the year, the US Air Force came up with what they called the General Operating Requirement. You want to intercept nuclear bombers as far away from shore as possible, so the plane needed to have a long range. 1,000 miles without refueling, to be precise. It also needed to get there quickly, so it had to reach speeds of Mach 1.7 and reach a height of 60,000 feet. Naturally, this meant that they would need at least 2 engines. And lastly, it needed to have 2 crew members and some serious and precise firepower. After all, this thing was designed to hit a dart with another dart, all moving at supersonic speeds. To save costs during the development, they decided to use the General Electric J93 engine. Yes, this is the same ones that were used on the XB70, which of course we've already done a video all about on this channel. So that's some homework for you, dear audience, to watch after this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, I do suggest you do that. We've reached 700,000 subscribers this year, and I'd really love to try and reach 1 million. So do subscribe if you haven't already. They could definitely give this new aircraft the required speed, but the range was also a bit of a nugget that they would have to crack. So whatever this jet ended up being, it would have to have large wings and a fuselage that could house large fuel tanks, making this fighter interceptor bigger than the B-58 that was also under design at the time. The fuel used would be zip fuel, which was all the rage during the 1950s. It had a higher energy density, offering more range and speed. With all of that sorted, they needed to figure out how to add weapons to this thing, and they came up with an ingenious solution. They used a rotary missile bay to fit 3 missiles inside. And I can hear what you're thinking. Nick, only 3 missiles? Well, this just wasn't any missile. This was the GAR-9. The idea was for it to fly at Mach 9 and reach targets 160 kilometers away. Totally unheard of at the time. But I'm not done. The XF-108 would also get an amazing pulse Doppler radar. It would be the first of its kind in a military aircraft. This would give it the ability to look down and shoot down with its missiles, and an infrared homing tracker on the missiles to hunt down those planes in the 1950s. Now, there were 2 problems with the development of this insane project, and obviously the first one is budget. This project was halted in 1956 due to funding concerns. This was all sounding way too expensive. But the US military-industrial complex allowed it to continue a year later because it showed so much promise. Pretty much at this point, North American was a fat kid at a 1950s milkshake bar that hadn't been told no, so of course they wanted all the sprinkles. The second issue was with the aerodynamics of the plane. The initial designs featured a cranked delta wing with canards, but over time they were abandoned and we got a more streamlined look in the end. Although there was still some room for improvement in the aerodynamics department, the rest of the jet exceeded all of initial expectations. The plane would be able to climb up to 80,000 feet, have a range of 160 miles, or around 250 kilometers in European units, and the capability of flying at, get this, Mach 3. Add to this all the incredible technology we mentioned before, plus those weapons, and you have an absolute hit. You could very clearly tell that I'm very excited about this plane, and I can't wait to see it in action. So with North American building a wooden mock-up in 1959, and everything seemed to have been going smoothly for the jet, why was it never built? We mentioned earlier in this episode that the US wasn't dumb. Many people were skeptical about the capabilities of the Soviet bombers, most notably President Eisenhower himself. He agreed to develop a spy plane, the U-2, in order to get a clearer picture of just how strong the Eastern Bloc was. The U-2, during one recon mission, photographed 30 M4 Bison bombers in a single base. This caused panic initially, but as it later turned out, that was all of them. No other M4s had been stationed at any other base. So hold on, was there a little bit of smoke and mirrors going on in the Soviet Union? On the Soviet Aviation Day show, there had been 18 jets flying. But it turns out that the Soviets flew 10 planes in one direction and then turned around and had another 8 join the formation, thus creating the illusion that there were 28 planes at that one time. So no, they weren't developing them at such a fast rate, and it turned out that maybe the Soviets never even intended to do that. Oh, and speaking of intentions, it turns out that the M4 Bison itself wasn't that capable at all. It lacked the range to reach the US mainland without refueling, given the location of Soviet air bases. And the Soviets themselves kind of figured out that nuclear bombers weren't what they should be focusing on. They instead turned their attention towards ICBMs, and in the end, only 93 Bison were ever built by 1963. It turned out that by simply building more B-47s and B-52s was probably the right answer all along. And also given that they learned about the M4s, the newly developed F-106 Delta Darts would be more than enough to defend America's skies from these bombers. There simply wasn't much use left for our hero. Additionally, the development of the XF-108's primary weapon, the GAR-9, wasn't going according to plan. Many changes were implemented in order to make it effective and viable, but to get the desired destructive force and range, it had to grow in size and would have reduced its speed just down to Mach 4. This would mean that the entire weapons bay of the jet had to be redesigned. And it also goes without saying, but the entire project would have been far more expensive. According to Eisenhower, a viable fleet would cost around $4 billion. That's around $42 billion today. That's 4 times more than the F-16 program. They did, however, try to figure out another role to give to the Rapier and to not waste all their hard work. North American had the idea to use it as a fighter that would escort the XB-70s to its intended target, but it would lack the range even with the size of its fuel tanks, so it could never keep up with the bomber. Another idea was to use it as a gap filler for the distant early warning system. It could scan a lot of the area not covered by the system due to its speed, but this role would not justify the expense. North American also did try to improve the design and get a better wind tunnel results with models in hopes of reviving the project, but ultimately it was cancelled. But it did leave its mark on the world of aviation. North American would use a similar fuselage and weapon design on the A-5 Vigilante, successfully implementing what they had learned so far. The GAR-9 never really took off, but the concept and data used in its development led to the creation of the very popular AIM-54 Phoenix missiles. Finally, the high-tech radar that was further developed and used in the YF-12. In fact, its rear cockpit looks very similar to what had been the cockpit on the XF-108. And of course, we have a video on the channel all about that insane interceptor project. The XF-108 Rapier, while only a concept, was still a crazy and innovative way to combine all the cutting-edge technology from the 1950s, some of it that we wouldn't really see in development or use until the 1970s, so it really was an insane project. The experience that the engineers gained while working on it was invaluable, and it helped them overcome obstacles on many other future projects. But last but not least, they allowed us to have an interesting video for you today on Found and Explained. And I think I can speak for a lot of people where you can hear my enthusiasm in the voice for this project, because this jet just looks and sounds and was totally cool. And I kind of am a little bit upset that they never got it right to the point where we could see it flying in the sky today. Imagine it at air shows, that would be crazy. What other crazy planes would you like to see? Let me know down in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.